Welcome back to Vice Grip Garage and part 2 of the small block Chevy 406 build. A guy's rebuilding this and reconfiguring it from a higher compression naturally aspirated engine to a lower compression engine for a big old blower that came on this thing. Now previously we disassembled everything, inspected it, figured out what we had for the most part, put some new bearings in it, got the crank in it, got it dingle balled, cleaned up, painted. But we still have a tremendous amount of work to do, which is what's up next. We've got to get the pistons in here. We're going to put timing gears, timing cover, oil pump, oil pan. We're then going to measure the camshaft, just in case you don't have a card, I'll show you how to do that, to figure out our proper rocker arm geometry, set up our valve train on top of the cheapest heads that I could find that might maybe-ish work, put all the accessories, dress this up, get that big old BDS blower on here, and bolt this into a borrowed engine stand and fire it up. It's either going to scatter our eardrums or parts. Both are expensive and ill-advised. Couple things to discuss here quick, and then I'm going to jump right in. First thing I'm going to do is just roll the new rings onto the existing pistons here so we can get them jammed into the block. Now the rings are just a basic OEM sealed power pack, but I've filed them to fit this engine specifically or gap them for boost, which was the primary reason I decided to tear this engine down and rebuild it. And I'm so glad I did. We caught a couple things, prevented a couple things, and we're going to fix a couple more, including bearings. It needed it something fierce. Now those rings that I filed in part 1 are going to be going on existing TRW pistons. They're 30 over, flat top variation with valve reliefs. Not quite the right piston, but we're going to fix our compression ratio with a gasket and the heads coming up a little bit later. I'm going to get these rolled on quick. Not a lot of magic putting on piston rings other than a comfortable chair and something to wet the back neck. It's slightly time consuming and fairly tedious. The only thing you really have to pay attention to is your constructions, because every ring is slightly different. It's going to have on the ring a dot or a diamond or a square or an octagon or a squiggle or a letter or a word such as top or this way up dummy or something to tell you which way this piston ring goes onto the piston. Sometimes there'll be nothing. You've got to look close into here and it's going to say, look, it's going to have a beveled edge, or it's going to have a certain face, or one side's going to be chromish color. Make sure you follow that closely. Here coming up when we jam them in the block, we'll talk about clocking the rings, which really is not that important. But for now, I'm just going to roll these on. You've got first groove, second groove, third groove. Start with the third groove or the bottom. You can use a piston ring spreader if you want. I do not, at least until I cut my hand 13 times. Just be gentle, go slow. Be careful not to drag the end of the ring across the face of the piston and create grooves. If you do, not the end of the world. Pause, emery cloth it, make sure you can't catch a nail. Clean everything up again, and then try again. Oh, my favorite. No, it really isn't. So it doesn't really matter what piston a guy grabs. They all need rings in the end anyway, but what I do have to pay attention to, you'll notice I'm kind of bouncing around on my cardboard temp latte here, is which stack of rings I'm grabbing. Because remember in part 1, we filed these rings specifically for each cylinder bore. They all vary and they have to go on the correct piston. So that's why I'm bouncing around here, grabbing different pistons, different rings. Just pay attention to which piston you grab and match it up. Getting ready to put these in, just something quick to note on the rod cap here. You got to be careful because there's a right and wrong way to put these on. They're slightly offset as well. It's kind of hard to tell just by looking at it. But this tang or this wing typically goes against the crank side or would not go against the other rod. So this, I could tell you, is actually backwards. And if we look at this, you'll see front arrow facing back. We got to spin it around this way. And now that tang would go against the crank. And the number 1 on the opposite side would be a mirror image. So its tang would go that way. Like that. I'm going to put this on the other way around just so you can kind of see. Goes on both ways, but if you look close, it doesn't fit right. So just something to note. The other way to know really quickly if they're similar on the exterior is your little tab. The tabs go on the same side. You'll have a tab here and a tab here on the rod cap. Tab and tab. Let's get these jammed in. Just a couple other quick notes before we get started here. We're going to clean the block for the 30th time. Surprise. We don't want any debris on any of these bores. I'm going to soak them all down with engine oil. I'm also going to use my little oil can and make sure that this is completely just soaked in oil. You can even have a pan and just dip the thing in there. Be liberal with your application and lubrications. Now we've got the bearings in, but I'm actually only going to lubricate, and I'm going to use Ultra Slick in this case so it stays in place. Only the rod side of the bearing. The cap I'm not going to lubricate because we need to measure our clearance on our rods as well. And if I lubricate this and then try to use my plastic gauge, it's going to be a mess. I've also got the crankshaft down in the hole, so when the piston goes in, it's going to be down. And that's so when we rotate this engine upside down again, the crank is on the high side so we can fit that plastic gauge in. So the book tells you to do all of them. But if I take my caliper and I measure the crankshaft, which I have, and we know we're 20 thou off, if the crank is consistent and the bearings are new, they should all be really close. So I'm going to do probably one over here, maybe a third, and we're going to call that good and just move on, okay? So let's talk about ring compressors really fast. So ring compressors, you have the old school style, which works just fine. This is an upgraded version. It's just got a little toggle on it, but squeezes your rings, drop them in, get those at any parts store. If you're going to be doing it enough, one of these is handy. There's our bore, and it's tapered. You literally just set it on the block, drop the piston in, whack it with a hammer, and it squeezes it to the right size. This one's pretty cheap, but the nicer ones have a lip on it that actually sits in the bore so it doesn't move around as easy. So this is what I'm going to be using. So I'll just show you how to plop one in here, and then I'm going to plastic gauge it, which you know that process from part 1. Pretty simple, straightforward. If that looks good, then I'm going to get to rocking. Got all these fancy tool holder holes in this rig here. Soaking this down. Plenty of oil. Now, one thing I'm going to do is put vacuum caps on this hardware here. You can use a piece of fuel line or something like that. But what that's going to do is if this drops in or I get a little too feisty, that hardware isn't going to bounce off of our crank. I put a big divot in it. And that metal's got to go somewhere. So if you put a dent in that crank journal, it creates a rise somewhere else. And what that's going to do is tear up your brand new bearing. We obviously don't want that. So be very careful setting these in. Okay, lots of oil. Clocking rings. 99.943% of the people out there are going to terrify you. You're going to see, read, hear people say, if you don't clock your rings right, they're not going to seal and your rings aren't going to bite and you're going to scatter parts and you're going to ruin your engine and the whole build is shot. Here's what I'm going to tell you. If your ring grooves are clean in your piston Your rings don't have any burrs or any obstructions on them, so they move freely, and your engine isn't significantly damaged, your bore. Your piston ring gaps really don't matter that much. Here's why. The absolute millisecond you fire this engine up, these rings rotate. So if they rotate in their bores, albeit different speeds, why does it really matter the orientation, other than the half a second when you fire it up? So all I do is point one at, call it noon, point the other one at 6, oil ring, point one at noon, point the waffle ring at like 3, point the other one, where's that? Over here at 7. Sure, good to go, because it really doesn't matter. Oops, one thing I forgot to do. I will just set this right there for a second. Also need to add some oil to this. This is dry. There we go. So we kind of have our piston rings clockish. Get this puppy started. I'm reaching in here. We got plenty of room because remember the crank is on the bottom. Now I've got this hammer, but you know what else works just the same? A regular dead blow. That way. Piston's in. Now I'm just going to guide it down to the crank. Adding some more oil to that bearing. And this sound right there is awfully satisfying. We are home. Make sure that your piston, the dot or the arrow is facing forward. These are labeled. We didn't have to do that. And going way back to part 1, if you have to make a marking on these somehow, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can stamp them right on the top of the piston. These are all done on the rod, and we did not remove the rods from their original location, so we didn't have to do that. Vacuum caps come off for the next, and that is it. So see, as planned, with that piston way down on the bore, we could put our plastic gauge right here, and it's not a situation like this where we're trying to lay that in and fight the caps out. The caps on this, because of the ARP hardware, however that was put in, they are a bear to fight. That's another reason I'm only gonna do a couple. So let me get that done. I've got to torque this to spec with the plastic gauge in here. I'm gonna clean this up and we'll see what it tells us. We're gonna use our loose gauge of 1 thou per inch of journal. Let's see what we get. I've got to go find my small torque wrench. I usually just use my elbow clicks. You know, pretty accurate over the years. There we go. Time to go digging. Just sneaking up to it. Sneak. Sneaking. More sneakage. There we go. Yay. Now, use this tool incorrectly. Loosen it. Take the cap off, look at the gauge, you know the dance. Sometimes you learn as you go. Sometimes you lead it, sometimes you follow. But don't worry about what you don't know. If you know the rest, you might as well bleep bloop it down in the comments. Oh, it's gonna be stuck in my head all day now. Okay, we've learned that this is now going to be stuck on there for life. So let me fight with that for 13 days. Oh, there's a small one right there. Get the cap off and we'll measure. So we know that this is typically 2.1, but it's 20 thousandths off. It took 20 thousandths off. So 2.08. And on this gauge, it's going to be, it's kind of hard to see, but it kind of in between the two. And again, this is kind of just eyeballing her. We're not building the race motor here or anything like that. So if we hold this up here, yeah, it's like, you know, right in-ish there. So I mean, if it looks good from your house, seems fine here, I think we march on. Well, this is gonna sound like a feller's talking out of both sides of his mouth, you know, a little hypocritical, but as you're installing these rods and pistons, you do want to rotate the engine a little bit just to make sure that nothing is binding, because if it is, you'll know it's the last rod you put in and you can find and correct the issue. But what I mean by rotating is just turn it enough to where you're lining up the next journal with whatever piston you're putting in. Don't sit here and rotate it over and over and over and over. We want to retain as much of that lubrication as possible we're applying to the rod bearings so we don't fire this thing up dry. And keep in mind, we have to rotate this engine again when we set up our valve train a minimum of 4 times. Most likely 5 or 6, maybe 7. I don't know. But what I'm saying is rotate it, but don't. You'll probably notice here I'm oiling the hardware before I put the nuts on, and it's a great idea to do that. Some of them have fastening lube or torque lube. I just use motor oil, but lubricate it so you don't get a false reading on your torque specs. Well, we've got all the rods in, torqued up, everything's looking great, engine rotates just fine, so we're clear to move on. Time to talk about oil pumps here. Now, if you're on a very tight budget, it is very feasible and practical to reuse the old oil pump. This one did make pressure, we know that. However, a couple concerns. One, the bearings were smoked. Did it run out of oil, or did something happen with the pump? The screen isn't plugged. Not really sure, up for debate. Two, and the reason I'm not going to use it is the old boy that put this pump in last time installed it incorrectly, and this was smashed against the bottom of the pan. It was laying against it, which is a big no-no. That only gives us this small area in front, and no oil was coming across the bottom of the sump here. He did, however, correctly put a weld on here, which I'm going to do the same with mine. So we're going to go ahead and replace this. This is a Melling high volume. You could tell because of the part number. It starts with an M and it ends with a HV. Now, to set the clearance on here, you're going to have to read your pump. Whatever manufacturer it is, they usually have a recommended clearance in there. And it's typically, on average, around 1/4 inch. Some say 25 thou to 70 thou. Some say 1/4 inch to 3/8. You'll just have to look. But end of day, none of them say, lay this against the bottom of the pan. That's the most important thing. So how do you measure this? Well, it's as easy as snug this up, don't torque it down, lay a straight edge across here and measure to the pan rail on the block. And then you do the same on your pan, lay the straight edge across the pan, measure into the pan, subtract the two, bam. Now, what almost all manufacturers don't mention, including the one that I bought, is the gasket. Well, that adds depth to your pan. So don't forget to lay the gasket on here when you're doing your measurement from your sump to your block. You've got to take that gasket into consideration as well. Now, I do it a little bit differently. Sometimes, well, I do it that way, but you can actually say it's 25 thousandths. Well, how am I going to figure that out? Here's a cheap hack. Remember that dial caliper we were using, we're going to use again here in a minute? Go find a washer, a couple washers, whatever it is. Stack them together, find that measurement, knock in your sump arm to where it's still going to move, stack those washers on here, put your gasket on, gently push your pan in, and it is going to move your sump arm keeping that gap. When you lift the pan back off, make a mark from the tube to the pump itself, knock it into place, and you have precisely the gap that you need. And that's how I'm going to do mine. And I am going to weld mine really quick as well. This was MIG welded. Didn't look like it went too hot. We got some cast and stuff like that. I'm going to heat mine with a torch and then TIG it, wire brush it, clean it up, and we're going to put that new pump on. After that, we're moving on to cam and gears. Things are happening. Unfortunately, this one goes in the trash. It goes into the trust because I don't trash you. It must be taco time. Or tequila. Got this cleaned up and painted. Come on. There we go. Okay, go clean this, weld it, and then we'll actually install it. Sure. Okay. Hot potato. Get this installed. Now the intermediate shaft or drive shaft here, this one is steel coupled. And very good idea to do so. The OEM ones, this one's not going to want to stay. I'm going to lay this out so we don't forget it. This part is plastic, and it can break and shatter and run the risk of not spinning your pump or damage to the pump occurring. That's something that's been corrected with pretty much all of the aftermarket pumps now. Be nice to throw the oil pan on, but we can't yet. We have got to get to the timing set. In order to get to the timing set, we've got to get to the camshaft. But before we put that in, we're going to measure it. I'm going to show you how to measure your camshaft. You pull it out, you don't know. It sounds like it's a cam, got some sort of performance or attitude, but it's not stamped, you don't have the card. I'm going to show you how to measure it up. It's actually really simple. We need those numbers to figure out our proper rocker arm geometry here coming up in a little bit. So let me torque that down. We'll probably spin this around just so it's not confusing. Engine's right side up. And we got a camshaft measure get in and gears put on. So of course, immediately after I bolted on the oil pump there and torqued that down, I realized I missed a pretty critical step when explaining the rear main. I just kind of plopped it in there. I should point out, we have 20 thou off of the crank, right? Well, how do we know we still use a Fel-Pro 2900 versus a Fel-Pro 2909? A Fel-Pro 2909 rear main is for blocks that have been line honed, so the outside diameter is larger. The fastest way to tell if your block has been line honed, well, there's two ways. You could just measure here, and there should be some pretty obvious machine work done. But the fastest way I found is just take a straight edge, and you have the lip where your rear main sits or rides on. This is all oily, I've had it all lubed. And then you got where your bearing sits. With the bearing out, take your straight edge and just slide it across here. If it hits that lip, like this is a standard or stock main cap. If this slides all the way across, that means it's been line honed. The machine has come through here and honed this out. Being this hits like this, we would still use a Fel-Pro 2900. Now I've done exhaustive research, a significant amount, trying to find a specific rear main seal that would be for a 10 or 20 thou off crank. To my knowledge, that doesn't exist. And maybe there is some super special company out there that makes one. If you know of that, bleep bloop it down there for us. That'd be great. But when I called Fel-Pro, they kind of went, well, the tolerances, it might weep, but they're made to soak that up, essentially. So we're still going to run the Fel-Pro 2900 and just hope that it doesn't leak like a sieve. Okay? Let me bolt this back on again, and then we're on the camshaft. So before we get to measuring the old torque twister here, I want to talk about basic camshaft anatomy and what each of these pieces are, what they're called and what they do, and then we'll jump into measuring. And I'm gonna keep it very basic. This looks complicated, but it's actually really straightforward how these work. So let's talk about the names of all of this stuff. So let's run through this camshaft quick. Some of the obvious things here is where your camshaft bearings sit. This is your distributor drive or gear right here. And then on the very front here, you can see this lobe. See how it's shorter here, higher here. This runs the fuel pump pushrod, which is essentially a bar in here that actuates the fuel pump armature. So as the engine's running, that's actually what's driving your fuel pump. And then we actually have our intake and exhaust lobes in here. Now the parts of the lobe, we'll kind of try to keep this simple and just the need to know stuff. You've got what's called the base circle, which is right here on the heel of your lobe. This entire piece is called the lobe. This down here is the base circle, also the heel. Now you'd think this would be called the big toe if this was the heel, but it's not. It's actually called the nose of the cam lobe. So base circle, heel, nose. And now your max lift is essentially the difference between the base circle and the top of the lobe, which is this part right here. And that's pretty much what we're going to be measuring, is the max lift. Now your duration is the amount of time that the lobe opens the valve through here. And your LSA or lobe separation angle is the amount of time or overlap that both the intake and exhaust valves are open at the same exact time, which does impact performance. The sound of it, that lopey aggressive sound, is typically a lower number, like a 106 LSA, which this is. Now, it's important that we mention that because this particular cam is made for a naturally aspirated engine at high RPM. So, a 106 LSA camshaft, terrible for a blower motor. Actually, we're probably going to have some tunability issues. It's most likely going to have what's called a blower surge, which some people like the sound, you know, the rum, rum, rum. When in reality, that's an engine that's typically, not always, but typically not tuned very good. It's got the wrong camshaft or the air fuel mixture's off, something like that. We'll try to tune that out of it. I'm pretty positive it's going to have it. But if not, it's going to sound really cool. Some of you might say, Derek, we'll just put a roller camshaft in there that it's actually made for a blower. Well, here we are still doing budget builds a decade later. We'll use this one. It works. It's got good lifters. We'll just jam it back in and hey, we'll see what happens. If it's terrible, we'll do a cam swap in the truck. But essentially, what we're going to do here is just measure our lobes and do a little bit of math. And I'll show you how that's going to work. All we need is our fancy dial caliper here. Again, you can use a manual one. This one's got the digitals on it, so I ain't got to use the readers. And we can tell fairly close, not always precisely, but pretty darn close, what this camshaft is if we don't have the grind or information on the back of it. So I'm going to kind of show you this here on the board, and then I'll actually show you with the camshaft. But essentially, we're going to be measuring nose to heel. We're going to subtract the base circle, and we're going to multiply that by the rocker arm ratio, and that will give us our valve lift. Sounds like a lot and complicated, but it's not. Here I've drawn a camshaft lobe. We have the heel of it. The base circle is right here, and then the red is, if you can imagine, the actual circle, just to kind of visualize that better. But the base circle is essentially from here to here. And then we have our actual lift up to the center here. So the two things that we're going to be measuring is from nose to heel. So let me get a marker out. From here to here, we need that measurement. And then we need from here to here. Now the rocker arm ratio, like small block Chevy, typically 1.5. But if you have a performance setup, it could be a 1.6, maybe even a 1.7. That should almost always be stamped right on the rocker arm, and we'll double check that. Okay, so what does this all mean when you're actually doing it? I'll kind of just show you. Now, I've always come up with just one push rod length on a small block Chevy. Keep in mind, like big block Chevys, you're gonna have different length push rods. Some camshafts are also dual pattern camshafts, meaning the exhaust lobe is different than the intake lobe. So you might want to measure both depending on your application. I don't know what kind of rig you got. But essentially, if we're measuring the base circle, pick one. My reminder to forget to clean this. We've been rolling it around a lot. And essentially, you're just going to measure that base circle I just scribbled on the board over there. And take your time and make sure you're actually getting the base circle accurately. Wiggle it around, etc., etc. Now, nose to heel is just that. We're just going to measure from the heel to the nose. We would go like that. Same thing, rock it back and forth and make sure you're actually at max lift when you're doing this, okay? And those are your two biggest numbers. Record that, jot it down somewhere, make it happen, okay? Then, you won't be able to see it, you'll just have to trust Uncle Derek, but here is our roller rocker that came out of the engine. And right here, like I was saying, it does say 1.5, and that is our rocker arm ratio. So if we take our measurements here, our heel to nose, our base circle minus those, multiply it by 1.5 in this case, that is our valve lift, and it does work. I am within 2/1000ths. Now, just out of curiosity, I did call Crane and I said, here's what I'm doing. Does this make sense? Does this work? And he kind of chuckled and he said, boy, folks haven't done that in a long time, but yes, it does. But he said, also keep in mind, you have squish or quench with your hydraulic lifter. There's some play there. So he said, you're never really going to get an exact measurement, but you're going to be really, really close. So in this case, that's the case of the case. It was close. It's close enough to get us a very accurate push rod length when we set up our proper rocker arm geometry. Okay, let me clean this camshaft up. We're gonna lube her up really good. We're gonna jam this into the engine, then we can get our gear set on. All of that just so we can get our timing cover on, so we can finally put in our oil pan gasket and oil pan. Well, the guy actually did remember that I was gonna forget to remember to lube this. So surprise, here we are. Got this nice and clean. It was bouncing around on the table over there where there was a bunch of metal filings, almost like someone filed rings. Now, like I said earlier on, I rarely ever replace cam bearings for two reasons. One, I'm lazy. Two, I can't remember the last time I saw cam bearings that were bad. It's just typically not something that happens unless there is a catastrophic failure. Now, I've got the engine actually upside down. I used an oil can, did my best to squirt a little bit of oil into the cam bearings there, but we're going to actually be lubing that as we're installing this. And I actually have it upside down because there's something I always do when we get towards the end. Take your time here, particularly with that distributor drive gear. That thing can gouge a bearing in a hurry. I like to do a little bit of the cam, and then I come in and lube the next, just so I don't have this huge mess dripping, hanging off out here. And I can focus on getting a nice coating. I'm using this Ultra Slick because this is gonna hang on to these lobes until we fire it, where engine oil might just run right off, although we are firing this up pretty quickly. Okay. Looking good. Gonna need my super special installation tool here in a second, which is just a screwdriver. Right here, I'm going to pause. If I look into the block, I can actually see between these two rods and the crank, the end cam Bearing Rider Association, PBR? No. The camshaft, the very end of it that goes into the last cam bearing, I can see that in there. And what happens as you're pushing these through the bearings is you're wiping all of that lubrication off. So I like to pull it back just a titch, and we're gonna gently set this down right there. And now I can reach in and lube that right before I press it into the end, and then I'm satisfied, and I don't have to be concerned about only the front being lubricated and not the back. And that's another reason I put these upside down. There we go, and I can actually get that one too. Give her a little twist. Perfect. Now I can get my tool and run this thing all the way home. Stringy. Okay. Come on, there we go. Boom. Give her just a little twist. Everything feels good, nice and seated. Camshaft back in. Now we'll rotate this around, and we are going to use a timing gear set instead of chains. So this is the old timing chain that we took out of the engine, and we had quite a bit of slop in this thing, so it's best to replace it, and we're going to do that. But we're actually going to be using a timing gear set. That being said, is there anything wrong with timing chains? No. In fact, they still put bicycle chains in engines today. They're out there. They work great. But as you know, just by watching this show alone, the one thing you can always count on with the timing chain set is this chain stretching over time. You have to look at all of the different links and pieces in here that are going to wear, stretch, maneuver, potentially break over time. That's the downside of the chains. Very affordable OEM build, low performance builds, boom, no problem. Now, I am going to be running a gear drive set for 3 reasons. I don't know, I like them, kind of prefer them. Because if you look at this setup, what is going to stretch here? Nothing. It's mechanically, physically impossible. And in my personal opinion, and quite a few others, this will give us extremely more accurate timing, for one, and a lot better throttle response, because the crank and the valve timing and the camshaft are always going to be in line. There's not a lag there when you crack the throttle. The camshaft isn't trying to catch up, as they sometimes do when they stretch. Another reason is this is what's called a noisy gear set. And about 5 of you just went, oh, 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 oh. All right, now we're talking. Yeah, yeah. This intentionally is machined and manufactured. When this engine is even idling, it sounds like a massive blower is making 5 pounds of boost. Just throws out a super awesome whine. I've even put these in naturally aspirated engines because it just sounds so radical. Well, with the blower motor, I definitely want accurate timing. I don't want to be replacing this if it stretches. And the additional noise factor for our little Matchbox El Coquino back here is going to be fantastic. So I'm going to be putting this in. It is more expensive than a chain. Do we have to use a chain? No. Are we on the same page? Super. Now, one thing to keep in mind, stock OEM chains typically don't have a way to manipulate the timing. However, performance single roller, double roller chains, and gear drives, you can actually add or subtract timing right into your timing set. So keep that in mind. Don't accidentally put, in this case, the wrong bushing in. You could throw in 5 degrees of timing, and then when you go to set your initial timing, you're not timing it the way you think you are. Yeah, I think I said that correctly. So pay attention to that. In this case, it's a bushing. They're typically like copper, red, yellow, black. And you can keep it straight up, which is 0, or you can add up to 5 degrees right into this as you bolt it to the camshaft. We're gonna run it straight up, and then we'll do all the timing with the lightning whirler. Pretty straightforward. There's a thrust bushing that goes onto the camshaft, gear goes on the top, this goes on the bottom, the dog bone slides in the center, bam, we're done. Now, we're gonna set this to TDC on number 1, which is where the crank will be at 12 o'clock, the camshaft will be at 6 o'clock, and they'll be pointed directly together or right down to each other. This has a dot right there. This has a dot right there. Going back to earlier when I was talking about timing chains, if you're adding time in those, it could be a square or a diamond or something like that. So just read the constructions, I said it, and pay attention as you're putting this in. Especially, not in this case, but if you have an interference engine, really pay attention. But you're probably running a belt in that case. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm gonna put this on. Okay. So this can go on backwards. There's our dot. We don't want to put it on this way. So we'll put that on. That tells me right away I need to rotate this just a titch. Obviously we can see that. So this will be coming straight up. This piece right here, we'll lubricate and set on. And then our camshaft gets bolted up. And that dowel, see how that's moving? That's where we can put a bushing in. And see how this will change and still bolt up. But we can manipulate the timing with these bushings right here. See how that one is oddly shaped? So forth. And then we've got a lock plate and a cam button that goes in there as well. So it's a full kit. And right here is where it explains our timing, and that's what it looks like all set together. There's how to adjust your clearances on your buttons. Don't drop your axles, it says. Okay, all right. All right, timing set is in. Gasket and cover on. When I was disappearing and coming back and forth, I was filing, machining the large gear on the dog bone, which as you're facing the engine has to go on the left side because that's the side under torque. There's a standoff on the back of it that will set basically the tension or the not preload, I guess the distance between the block and the timing cover itself. The dog bone needs to float in that area. You can't pinch it with the timing cover. So I was going back and forth, machining that so it would fit correctly. I just put a little dab-a-doo, just a, not or just, boop, you know. right in here, just some goop. And then I am using these fancy peg standoff Roonies that come with the gasket. The 3-piece or 4-piece gasket that come in the overhaul gasket kit, I throw them directly in the trash. And I run one of these 1-piece because they will not leak, or you have a better shot at them not leaking anyway. Then these little standoff Roonies snap this into place and hold it for us as we put the pan gasket in, get our hardware started, and then we pull these out last with the standard screwdriver, bolt her up, we're good to go. Okay. Say a blessing to the bottom end. Hang in there, little buddy. We only got about 1,000 burnouts to do. Okay. There we go. Now we just need hardwares, and we are off and running. Oh no, did I get the thick? I did. I needed the thin. We are not off and running. I got there's a, on your oil pan gasket, there's a thick front or a standard front. This is a thick front. I have a standard front somewhere. I just need to go locate that and swap the gasket. Throw this one back in the cool box for another day. This piece right here, too thick. So this should be the right one. 34509 is standard, 35510 is the thick one, I believe. Same story. Let's bolt her down. Let's get her done. There we go. That is going to work just fine. Yep. All right, let me zip this on. We'll roll it over, and we're moving on to heads. Well, it's finally time for cylinder heads. Here's what we're going to be using, a garbage bag here, something like that. Little refresher on what we took off and why we're going with this thing. So we had double hump or camel hump heads on here, which, listen, those are great heads. They're kind of a staple in the hot rod community, and they've been around for a long time. People have been swapping them on to bump up compression and kind of hop up their hot rods, and they're being reproduced in various different configurations still today. Most commonly, they're 202.16 valves with around a 64 cc combustion, and they're 160 to 180 cc intake runner, depending on who you talk to and what day of the week. Some have accessory holes on the front, some don't. So being that we need to increase our airflow because we have a blower and we need to decrease our compression ratio, I found these. And since we're on a budget, we ended up with Pro Maxuses. I don't know, there's 2 R's and like 14 X's in the name. I think Google Translate really whomped them on that one. These also have 202.16 valves, but they have 200 cc intake runners and they have 72 cc combustion chambers. So we're going to increase the airflow and decrease the compression. And as a bonus, these have 575 springs, which the camel humps usually top out 490-500. They have screw-in studs and guide plates completely assembled. I nabbed these cheaper than a set of refurbed double hump heads. I don't know. We're going to give them a whirl and see what happens. But our goal is decrease the compression ratio, get some more wind through this thing. This seems to fit the bill. We're going to bolt them on and see what happens. Now, it is important to read the tech card of your heads, especially when you're swapping. A lot of times they'll tell you great information, The part number on this is small block Chevy 23-degree cylinder head. Okay, we'll skip through all this stuff, but it does tell us what spark plug to get, which is great. Recommended-ish intake gaskets. There's 42 different numbers here. I happen to pick up, I believe, 1206 Fel-Pros. It even tells you the exhaust gaskets, more importantly, the head gasket type or style, and also head bolts. So like an ARP 134 3601, which I think is what I got. So it kind of gives you all of those ingredients that play nice with the head itself. Before we flop these on, we still have to talk about head gaskets, and that is a pretty good conversation to have. By the way, the other big benefit is these are significantly lighter than the old cast heads. Before we bolt those heads on, let's really quick talk about head gaskets here. It's a very, very important part of your engine build, and most people commonly just overlook this or don't even think about it, but it's really important for two reasons. One, if you bore your engine over, whether it's 10, 20, 30, 60, whatever it is, you need to make sure you're running the correct head gasket. For example, we know that this is bored 30 over, so we need a 4.155 head gasket, and that's what this is, because the fire ring needs to be correct for your particular engine. So keep that in mind, stock versus overboard. Also, the thickness of the head gasket itself. This is a 40 thou head gasket. I intentionally went thicker on the head gasket to, again, help and aid in decreasing the compression ratio. You can run all the way down to a tiny little 10 if you're trying to pump up your compression ratio, all the way up to, I believe, around a 60 thou head gasket if you're trying to decrease it. So this is an MLS 40 thousandths 4.155 head gasket that's going to be perfect for our particular application. I'm going to slap these on super quick, and we'll be dropping those heads on here in just a minute. This side's already on. All right, heads are clean, right out of the trash bag from the longboat. Everything looks fine. Slide these into place, allegedly. There we go. Got to do a little Karate Kid. Bam. You know, machining's gone a long way. I remember getting some heads for like 570 bucks overseas, and they were in much worse shape than this. It's not too badly. Not too badly. Okay. 13-second visual inspection. Good. Boom. Break the wrist, walk away. So I'm going to knock out bolting these down, nothing fancy going on here. Using ARP bolts. Just a reminder, whenever you're cleaning up a block or doing an assembly like this, chase all of your provisions. And that's just to ensure that if a guy wants to use a torque wrench, you're not going to get a false positive or false reading on that. These come with assembly lube. If you're using a stock style, engine oil works just fine. Just a reminder, these washers do have an upside and a downside if you're using fancy stuff like this. And the great news is, when we blow a head gasket or potentially torch the Pro Maxes, we can at least reuse the head bolts. So I'm going to lay all these in. We're going to do it in 3 equal tightening sequences. The heads say 80 pounds, ARP says 70. We're going to go 76.52 or until kicks in. tight enough. Work from the center out. I like to just remember a circle. Small circle to big circle. Don't go left to right or right to left. And you'll be just fine on that. Boy, these are shiny. I should have spray painted them or rolled them in the dirt first, but we ain't got time for that, do we? Nope, I didn't think so. Well, you were saying you were gonna paint, and here we are. I didn't mean we're actually gonna paint them. I just said they're shiny. And then you got carried away with me saying I was gonna paint them. That didn't sound like what it sounded like to me. Okay, that is the correct way. Lube, stab, tighten. Well, the guys got the head strapped on and torque down in sequence. Now it's time to get to the valve train part of the build here. And this is a critical part of any engine build. And unfortunately, it is intimidating and can get very complicated as well. I'm going to try to break this down for you and make it as simple as possible though, and show you a way to get perfect rocker arm geometry. This is commonly misunderstood and misconstrued, and it's kind of just a legend out there that you just need to fart around with different pushrod lengths. And then once you get the sweep pattern in the middle of the stem, you're good to go. Well, it's actually opposite. We need to set proper rocker arm geometry first, and then our pushrod length is actually a result of this. And I promise you, if you follow this, you'll get maximum performance, maximum horsepower, torque, efficiency, and reliability every time. There's a little bit of math involved, and we need to know two critical things. Our camshaft specifications, which I just showed you how to measure. You probably have a cam card though. And we also need to know our stud size, whether it's a 3/8 or 7/16, for example, because this is going to be our measuring tool when we set up our proper rocker arm geometry. Now, this is best shown through illustration or drawing. I don't have a big whiteboard anymore. So what we're gonna do is take you back in time to the old Wisconsin shop where I've shown you previously how to do this. Now keep in mind, the numbers and math are incorrect for this build. We'll come back, circle back around, and I'll run through the numbers for this particular build so you can kind of see how that works. But I want you to see the actual illustration of what I'm talking about with mid-lift, gross lift, and everything like that. So, time warp. Back to Wisconsin, see you in a minute. Proper rocker arm geometry is when your rocker arm is at a perfect 90-degree relationship to your valve at mid-lift. So before we go any farther, let's wrap our brain stem around those two things, and then the rest of this might make a little more sense. This is a typical roller rocker here, and two of the items that make up that 90-degree angle are right here. The center of your trunnion, the center of your roller tip, and the other one is your valve itself. This is supposed to be a valve, just squint at it, you know. So this is at 90 degrees if we were to take the body of the rocker arm away. The second thing is mid-lift. Two different ways to think about this. You can combine them, use one or the other, I don't care. But basically, that's when your push rod and lifter is halfway through your cam's lift, gross lift, or your valve spring is halfway through its max compressed height. As an example, the lift on this cam on the exhaust side is 671. So mid-lift, if I divide that by 2, is 0.336. We're going to need that in just a minute here. One of the things you're going to need to know before we can establish proper mid-lift is your rocker arm stud size. If you have a 3/8 stud, that's going to be 24 threads per inch or 42 thousandths of an inch per turn on your rocker nut. If you have 7/16 inch studs, that's 20 threads per inch or 50 thousandths per turn on your rocker nut. So if we come over here, the three basic steps we're going to be taking is we're going to establish initially a 90 degrees to the valve, and we're going to use the retainer on the spring because we know that that's parallel to the bottom of the valve. Then we're going to calculate half of our lift, which we've already done here. Then we're actually going to take our turns, which I've already done by taking my gross lift divided by 2 is 336. Then I take 0.336 divided by 50 thousandths because I have 7/16 studs, and that equals 6.71 turns. So I'm going to establish my 90 degrees. I'm going to run my nut down 6.71 turns, and what that does is when my cam comes to mid-lift, I'm going to be back at this 90 degree mark. You can see this is where 90 degrees usually is. When we first initially set it to 90 degrees, if we're going to take half of that away, now it's like this, but when our cam comes to mid-lift or halfway through it, now this side comes down and we're at a perfect 90 degree relationship again, which is exactly where we want to be for this scenario here. So now we'll go downstairs and I'll actually throw this on, and we're going to do it again, and maybe with the actual hardware it'll make more sense. But I wanted to kind of explain what we're after first, so as I'm talking you through it again, you know, a guy's, I don't know, where'd my cap go? This is going to dry out now. Yep, well, there you go. That's probably clear as mud. But I'm going to walk you through this again. So let's just quickly look at this, because some of you, the most immediate response is, why would we take half away? And what does mid-lift have to do with the actual length? Wouldn't that make the push rod shorter? And then we're going to go through the numbers on this particular engine so you can see that application applied with different cams and numbers and studs and everything, and see that it really does work. So first, let's take a closer look at what does 90 degree mean. So when we get down to the nitty gritty here, what we're trying to do is establish a 90 degree relationship with the valve stem itself and the rocker arm assembly. So we have to remember, first of all, the spring retainer has to be 90 degrees to the valve stem. So in a sense, this is flat, and this right here is already 90 degrees. So all we're trying to do is match our rocker assembly, let me throw this back on here, to basically the spring retainer. So imagine a line from the trunnion to the roller tip. We're going to bring that to a 90, which is probably there-ish. But we'll go through this finitely here in a minute. And some of you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, that roller tip's about to fall off the stem. Correct. But remember, we are mathematically going to be taking exactly half away. And when that happens, it's going to look something like that. And at half or mid-lift is when we're actually going to measure our push rod length. Now, when this valve starts to open, we took half away, we're going to get that back on this end. If we take half here, we got to give half here. I know that's probably not very clear either. Hopefully all of this is going to make sense. After we do the math on this camshaft with this stud, figure out our turns, let's set it in here, and I'm going to show you guys how this works. Well, with this particular camshaft, here's our measurements here on lift. So we've got 516 exhaust, 502 intake. Obviously, it's a dual pattern camshaft, which is very, very common. These are so close together, I've actually decided to average them, which is 0.509. We're going to be plenty close enough, trust me. 0.509 divided by 2, we need to find half, is 0.255, which is actually 2.5456239879999627 repeating. But we're going to round it up to 0.255. Now we have 3/8 rocker studs, which is 24 threads per inch. And all that means is that you need to know is it's 0.042 inch per turn. So one turn is 0.042. So if I take 0.255 divided by 0.042, we need to turn our nut 6.07 turns to get to exactly mid-lift. Not guessing, not an eyeball, not close enough, not a marker on the stem, not so-and-so told me, mathematically and scientifically exactly half 6.07 turns. Now, obviously, it's probably going to be 6 and a tickle. But you see what I'm saying here. This will work, and you can apply it to virtually anything. So let's go set this up. We're going to draw our center line on the rocker arm assembly, throw it on, get a poly lock. We'll do the turns, and we'll come up with a push rod length. Small block Chevy with aluminum. I'm going to guess around 7.9, maybe change. We'll see. So we've got our lock on here. I've made a paint mark on here, and that's what we're going to use for our indicator of a turn. So an example of a turn would be like 12 o'clock. That's one turn, which is 0.042 inch. We got a rocker assembly on here. I've drawn the center line through the trunnion and a roller tip, which is straight edge there. And I'm already seeing the first issue with these heads is these studs actually aren't long enough. So I need to bring this up farther than what I can go to get to a 90-degree relationship. And what I'm using is just a little file. You can use a key stock, you can use an Allen key. If I hold this across here, I know that's flat, and then I just need to raise this to meet. Well, what's happening for me is I need to lift this a little bit more to bring this rocker assembly up to be parallel, and I can't. So we have to keep that in mind as we're taking a measurement here. So here's kind of what that looks like is I'm making sure this is seated. Yeah, I could use, see, and it comes off. So let me just barely get this started. Normally you would just put it half a turn, and then you can make your adjustments where this lines up. For me, that's not going to work. This is close-ish. I'm going to say it's probably 50 thou off. We're just going to have to keep that in mind as we set this up. Now, we're going to use an adjustable push rod length checker upper right in here. A great time to address some good questions I've had in the past. You want to make sure that your cam is on the base circle when you drop your lifter in here to do the measurement. And it doesn't matter where you're at in the firing order, just as long as you're absolutely positive your lifter is on the base circle of your camshaft. It does not matter if this lifter is pumped up or not. It could be right out of the box dry. Reason being is you can visually see and feel if you're depressing that spring cup in the lifter. So it really doesn't matter. This one obviously has been pumped up, so it's fairly solid. If it hasn't been pumped up, I can squish that in. We don't want to do that when we're taking this measurement, obviously. So base circle, drop your lifter in, pay attention when you're doing this. I'll just pull this out of the way quick. This is just a, what is this? Cam's push rod length checker upper. There are many different styles and types out there. Some even have the measurement right on them. This is an old school one where once we get it where we want it, we're going to pull it out and actually measure it. So after we set our turns, all we have to do is extend this to take up the slack, pull the rocker arm assembly off, and whatever that length is of this push rod is the length of our push rod. So let's go ahead and do that. We set 90 degrees. We're going to count 6.07 turns down. We're going to take up the slack with our push rod checker, measure this push rod, and that is it. Using math. Weird, because I am not good at it. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through the whole process from the get-go here. So I'm going to put my rocker arm assembly on. Barely going to start my nut. Right around there. Now you want to you're going to pull the rocker arm assembly up, get this as close to a 90-degree relationship as you possibly can, which for me is right here, right off the jump. My bing bangs don't really have all that much room in here. That's going to get us close enough though. Now we know that 255 is half the lift of the cam. When we take away our 24 threads per inch and our 3/8, that brings us to 6.07 turns. Now something important to mention, The nut is at about 3 o'clock for me, the paint mark that I have. Don't spin that to noon and then start counting, because you've already added math, right? So I need to keep 3 o'clock as my starting point when I do my turns. So all I'm going to do is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll see the rocker arm assembly dropping. 6. Now 0.07. Boop. Right around there. Now you'll see we no longer have a 90-degree relationship. Well, with a push rod in here, this is what mid-lift would look like. So I'm going to do this again, but this time I'm going to drop in my push rod length checker, okay? So as a reminder, I've got a lifter in here. Doesn't matter if it's pumped up or not. Just don't depress the spring cup when you're doing this. Pay very close attention to that. Make sure your push rod length checker is centered in the spring cup, and it's also in your rocker arm assembly correctly. Bring this up, and I don't even need to use a straight edge or anything, because for me it's minutely a thread is as close as I can get, and it's really close. So now I have my length checker in here. This is tight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a boop. Okay? Now all I have to do is just extend my push rod length checker, and we're taking up the slack between the lifter cup and the rocker arm assembly. We're not trying to open the valve, we're not depressing the spring cup. It's simply just taking up the slack. It's just like setting zero lash. So you don't want slop up and down. You want it fairly tight. You want to be able to spin it and rotate it in here, but you do not want to press on the assembly so hard enough you're attempting to open a valve or you're depressing the spring cup. Very important. We are right there. Okay, now all I have to do, take my rocker arm assembly off. You can grab a piece of tape if you want, if you really got the shakes. And you could tape the threads on here so that doesn't move. But all we need to do with this is measure it now, and this is our exact push rod length. Now, the precise way to do it would be with like a 12-inch dial caliper. I've got this little guy here, not gonna work. But I've got an old Stanley Fat Max over there that hasn't lied to me in years. And I can tell you a 1/16 of an inch is about 50 thousandths of an inch. You can do what you want with that information, but I will tell you, most manufacturers go in increments of 50 thousandths with push rods. So you'll have like a 7/8, 7/850, 7/9, 7/950, 8, so on and so forth. So let's measure this up and see how close a guy's eye was. Running a tape measure on it, which I know seems counterintuitive for engine work. And it is almost exactly, if we add back just the very, I'm talking a horsehair that we need on our 90-degree relationship. When I look at this, that is exactly 7 15/16, which is a 7.9 push rod. I happen to have those over in the tool chest. We're ready to rock. We drop those all in place. We've dropped the lifters in, drop our push rods in, get all of our rocker arm assemblies on. There's one last thing to talk about after we drop all the lifters, our push rods in, get our rocker arm assemblies on, which is lifter preload. Now, this can also get super complicated, and it doesn't need to be. There's people that do it by firing order, and if this valve is open, you got to jump over here and do that, or do this valve, or do this. Well, what if it's time to eat, or you get a phone call, or you got to run for a part, or life happens, or your kid gets you a Nerf ball right in the nose? Things happen. Where are you at in that process? I am going to show you an absolute foolproof way to set your lifter preload precisely and easily. Caveman could do it. Okay, let's dig in. Okay, I've got a cup of Valvoline VR1 here, and I'm just gonna go through and give these a bath of oil before I drop them in. And again, we know exactly where we pulled them out because of our tray setup over here. Just gonna go down the row, basically. If you're curious, the original push rods were too short, and that is extremely common anytime you switch to an aluminum head or an aftermarket head. You're gonna have a different length push rod. Just the way the cracker crumbles, or whatever. I made sure the lifter bores were nice and clean before I started jamming these in, of course. Careful not to dump a bunch of oil down your intake runners, you know, common sense stuff. After this, I'll go grab the push rods, jam all of those into place, loosely assemble all of the rocker assemblies. Then we'll start setting our preload. Bam, valve train done, and we know it's going to be correct. Be liberal with the oil here, ain't going to hurt anything. We're also going to prime this before we fire it, but we want to make sure everything is lubed as much as possible, especially if you're using a new camshaft. You're going to want some engine assembly lube or something that actually sticks on the lobes before you fire this thing. Oil is great for a quick rebuild like this where the camshaft is worn in, but you don't want to wipe a camshaft these days, and it's getting ultra scary losing a lobe. Okay. All of that looks fantastic. So as far as push rods go, these are super affordable. These are Summit Racing brand. It's just a stock OEM style, but it's the right length that we need. The part numbers are actually pretty slick. This is a 1457900. And I know that a 7900 is 7.9, a 7950, 7.950, a 7700, 7.7, etc. So you can't really mess that up. Bust these out. Really no reason to lubricate these. All the spring cups have oils floating in them. Once we drop these in, when we prime it, this will be transferring oil. Upper end will be lubricated. Bam. We're ready to rock. Ugh. And just for verification, make sure I'm not losing my mind. Yep. That is what we need, my friends. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Bam. Bam. And I am a hoarder, so of course I am going to measure the existing ones, push rods, throw them in this bag, remark that box, and put them back in my toolbox. There ain't nothing wrong with them. They work great. They're not bent. And I am certain someday we will say, man, I wish I had a 7 3/4 push rod laying around. And there we go. Well, we need to set our lifter preload, which is terminology for any hydraulic lifter, whether it's a flat tappet or a roller. If you have a solid lifter, this wouldn't apply, although the process is very similar. What I just did was set 0 lash. You just watched me do that. And I've intentionally made a couple mistakes I'm going to show you here in a minute. But first of all, let's talk about what is a 0 lash. And that's the step before lifter preload. Well, 0 lash is simply this. You have your lifter down here. You have your rocker arm assembly on the top. 0 lash means there's no negative, which would be slop, or positive, which would be pressure on your push rod. It's simply just existing between the rocker arm assembly and the lifter. It makes contact on both ends, meaning you can't lift it up and down. You can't jiggle or wiggle it. But it doesn't have so much pressure that you can't spin it. So 0 lash This is not zero lash. You can hear that moving. This is. I can spin it. It doesn't lift the rocker arm assembly up and down. It also does not depress the lifter cup whatsoever. It's just a bumper clearance between the two. This will spin and rotate. Just slight drag, not pressure, when you spin these with your finger. That is zero lash. Now, depending on your camshaft manufacturer or your valve train manufacturer, they're going to recommend, and usually they do this in turns. They're going to say, throw in a half a turn, or a 3/4 turn, or a 1 turn. And what they're talking about is after you set zero lash, and it's at 0, they're saying, tighten your rocker nut half a turn. So, rip. And you know now mathematically, in this case, that would be, what, 21 thousandths? You're adding to your valve train. And that's to soak up the hydraulic lifter. You got to remember that's like a cushion in there. So depending on RPM and how you're using the rig, it's kind of a spring, right? And that preload is kind of a cushion to make sure that that valve is still opening all the way and seating all the way. So I've gone through here and set zero lash on all of these except a couple. Let's go in here and look at a couple common mistakes, and then we are going to adjust these. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a very foolproof way. I learned when I was knee-high to a grasshopper in the pits of a race, dirt track race, when I was 8 or 9. And then I understood it. And ever since then, I was like, this has got to be the simplest way, and it's one of the best things my dad ever showed me. And I'm going to show you guys. So let's take a look here first. So one thing here is it does not matter where the lifter is, whether it's down or up, or essentially, as we learned earlier, if we're on the heel or the nose of the cam, it does not matter. We just want zero lash in the way that I'm showing here. So here I can easily spin it with my finger, spinning, 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 but I can't lift it up or down. The same is going to be true for this one, which is on the nose of the cam, which we learned earlier. I could spin it, but I can't lift it up or down. There's no slop between here and here, okay? All of these are the same, except I made intentionally a couple common mistakes. This one feels like it's at zero lash. It spins, it doesn't go up or down. Hey, we nailed it. Wrong. Look at this. It's not in the rocker cup. If I move this, now it is. But now look, we have all sorts of slop in here. So make sure, I like to seat them first into the rocker arm assembly, and then you can watch them drop into the cup. And again, you do not want to depress this cup. We're going to add preload later. Here's another one. Whoops. Look at that. Spins. I can't move it up or down, but it's not in the rocker arm assembly. I pull it back, set it in there, and now look at this. Slop. Slowly tighten this down. Too much. Too much. Perfect. By the way, you can do this in a vehicle. You do not have to have the engine out. You don't even have to have the intake off. You can spin your pushrod right here. Right? And it's very obvious when you're in the lifter cup. Make sure you're in the rocker arm assembly. You can do this with an intake on. If you just want to adjust your valves, that's no problem. It's even easier without guide plates. So now we're at zero lash. Just going through and double, triply checking. All that seems great. What we're going to do is rotate the engine 4 total times. See, I got to check myself. 4 total times. We're going to rotate the engine. But every quarter of a turn, we're going to set zero lash. So I'm going to put a wrench on here. Say it's at 12. I'm going to turn it here. I'm just going to come back through and make sure everything is the same. Some of them will change, some of them won't. I'm going to go to a half a turn. I'm going to come back in here, reset zero lash. I'm going to go to 3/4 turn, do the same. 1 full turn, do the same. They need to look exactly like this. The lifters are going to change. Some are going to get sloppier. Some are going to get tighter. We're going to do that in 4 total revolutions. 1, 2, 3, 4. By then, you will have hit every single valve multiple times, and you will 100%, no matter what, be at 0 lash on every single cylinder, every single valve, without fail, every single time. And the best thing is, if you have to answer a phone call or step out or leave, or you're gone for a week, you come back, guess what? It doesn't matter where you're at. Just rotate the engine. 0 lash. Rotate, 0 lash, rotate, 0 lash. So I'm going to do that process. And yes, as you're doing this, you will start to see valves opening. Completely normal. The push rod will be sinking into the lifter. Completely normal. What's the most important is when you're on the heel of the cam, you're at 0 lash, and that's why we continually rotate. This one is on the nose. Once I rotate the engine multiple times, I will eventually adjust this when this is on the heel. The same with this one, the same with this one, the same with this one. And that's why we're rotating it multiple times, is to make sure that we touch each and every single valve and push rod and rocker assembly multiple times to make sure that we're at 0 lash on the heel or base circle. So let me get this done quick and then we'll move on to the next step. One small tiny clarification I mentioned just a minute ago. You do not want to depress the lifter cup. That's on initial setup when you're doing your 0 lash. Again, as I also mentioned, as you're rotating the engine and going through this process, the lifter cup will naturally start to depress once that lifter starts hitting the nose of the camshaft. The most important thing, again, just reiterating for the 13th time, is when you're on the base circle, you're at 0 lash, lifter cup is not depressed, everything is making contact, but you can easily spin it with your finger. And this method works whether it's a hydraulic roller or a hydraulic flat tappet. And it does not matter if it's a 2-cylinder, 3-cylinder, 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder. The make and model and year doesn't matter. If it's a hydraulic lifter, this exact process will work side of the road, at a race, in your shop, backyard, doesn't matter, without fail. This is the way to do it. So, any who's and way, I need an Allen key and a wrench because I'm gonna have to start backing out some of these locks. Let's go through this. I'll get a wrench in the front. You can watch me rotating this, making multiple adjustments back and forth, back and forth. I won't bore you with that. We'll fast forward to the point we're gonna start adding preload. A guy is chuckling to himself. I just made a post on the interwebs. Every now and then I get out the pocket computer and get on the FaceSpace and the Installator. I've never said this before, I don't think, but if you're not following me over there, go ahead and do that. You get up to date daily who and where and what's and whys of what a guy is doing. Anyway, I posted a photograph of this engine. And I said, hey, we're putting together junk for stuff and it's pretty cheap. And man, I think about anybody can throw this together. And immediately, those are custom heads, fully fabricated, they're shiny, it's out of budget, no one can afford those, on and on. Listen, these things are literally cheaper than a rebuilt set of double hump heads. And for the quench, compression ratio, intake runner, spark plug angle, and what we're doing here, that is 109,000% positively the cheapest head I could get. It's 2025, for Pete's sake. Anyway, that's a long story to tell you. Go follow me on the interwebs. You can see what a guy's doing daily. Even my daily drivers, my breakdowns, my woes, my worries. There's a lot you don't see on the channel. Go over there and check that out. I'm just backing the lock nuts out right now because we're going to be adding our preload in just a minute, and I don't want to bottom out. All of these locks have been oiled, so they move freely. I don't have to worry about that. I thought I was going to have to adjust my zero lash on that one. We don't. If there was any a time you take your time during an engine build, it's on valve train. You can sleep through the bearings, the clearances, I mean everything. But when it comes to valve train, do that bright and early in the morning after a cup of coffee. This is where all of your power clearances, valve to piston clearance, I mean all that stuff. I don't know what you got going on, but this is where you really want to be astute. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about preload. Super easy. So now that we are 100% confident everything is at zero lash, here's another added benefit of doing it this way, is I can set my preload all at one time, every single valve, and we know it's correct. We don't have to bounce around and go back and forth or anything like that. So follow, again, your cam or valve train manufacturer's recommendation. I'm going to do a half, just because that's what's in the Sasquatch Bible. Okay? So all I have to do is go half. Half. I'm going to work my way all the way down. Wherever you put the wrench on, just pay attention. Wherever it lands, depending on where the nut's at, is going to be slightly different. I'm going to add a half turn of preload to every single one of these. And all I have to do is work my way around. And just like that, our valve train is set with proper rocker arm geometry, the correct pushrod length, and the correct preload. Some of these are going to be really soft, depending on where the lifter is on the cam. Some of them, like this one, is going to be tough because as you're tightening it, you are actually depressing the valve. The most important thing is you just stay consistent with how much you're putting into it as far as preload. Everything will be fine. I'm going to come back over this. I'm going to put that down there for now. Well, for heaven's sake. I'm going to come back around, use the Allen key, hold this with the wrench, and just lock the nut in. And bam, valve train, done. So I'm really hoping this has helped you thus far. And it really doesn't matter if it's a high performance build or just a, I need to get to work on Monday. This is all good practice stuff. So get in the habit of it. And maybe you can't build a hot motor now, but sometime in the future, you'll have the Pro Cs down, the steps, and it will all be locked in your dome. So when I'm locking these, I'm running the, well, for Pete's sake, someone has coated my tools with Pam. So I'm running these locks all the way down. And when they bottom out, I snug them. And then I give my nut just a boop, boop. And that'll run that lock down even harder. And that puppy ain't going nowhere. Hear that snap? She's locked. Gonna go all the way around and do this, and we're good. Come on, I got so much oil in here. Valve train is all finished up here. Now look at this, we're on the lobe. Perfect. this is gonna work just fine. Double check everything, make sure it all looks kosher, and we can cross this off the list. Valve train complete. By the way, if you're keeping track of expenses, the set of push rods there were $56 and change, I think, or something like that. And keep in mind, if you're doing the bare bones budget route, you wouldn't need those. You'd have the original heads back on it again. So you'd have gasket set, bearings, rings, potentially an oil pump, and you would have replaced the timing chain, I'm assuming, as well. Well, at this point, if you're doing the budget route again, we just put the old intake, fuel make it happen or on, the old accessories, and you're done. There's your quick little makeover engine rebuild. However, we are going to be taking the BDS blower and the accessories that came off of the 305 and throw it on this 406. Really not much to talk about here. It's just reverse order. So I'm just going to start slamming, see how much I can get on yet today. Start making this thing look complete. But first, we are going to take it from the engine stand, and I think I'm going to plop it into the run stand that I've borrowed. It's a little bit bulkier, but that way it's in there, and as we start adding weight, I want to run this thing in that engine stand first for you guys, and then we'll get it ready to plop in the El Coquino. I also just remembered why I remembered that I was going to put the crank drive accessorize on. It's because we were going to do it in the run stand. But anyway, let's get after it. I'm going to get this out of the way, get the cherry picker back in, get the run stand in here, do the whole thing, throw some parts on. Well, the guy's getting close here. A couple things I don't have. Got to run to the Hardmore stores. I'm out of pipe plugs. I need a couple of those. I need some exhaust gaskets. I got to figure out if I'm going to run shorties on this or tear the system out of the truck. Got to wire an electric fan and electric water pump. I got to get a fuel pump push rod. I think I've got a new pump actually for this. I had to adjust the lightning whirler color here, measure all that, make sure the gear mesh was good. We're gonna set it off at 12 degrees initial timing, see what happens there. I didn't use the old steel valve covers with the big finned scoop that goes on here. It was just screaming to get these Holley retro valve covers, and man, that looks really sharp. This is getting a little shiny. It's starting to scare me, I gotta be honest. If you're wondering why we're doing all this seems like a lot of trouble. Why don't we just throw it in the truck and start it? Well, when we got this much stuff going on, it is a lot easier to be right here when we fire these things off and break them in. We can look for hot pockets, leaks, make quick changes on timing, fuel, I mean, there's a lot we can do faster and more efficiently, not to mention all the carb timing, which this is 4-corner idling on both. We're going to try to get that idle surge out of it. Maybe not all the way. You know, the kids like that wompy stuff. But it's going to be a lot easier to dial this in. We'll probably just pull everything off from the chiller up, plop it in the truck, drop the top back on, and we know that it's all dialed, ready to rock. But I'm going to call it for today. I'll be back tomorrow morning early. We'll get this thing buttoned up and fired off. I cannot wait to hear this thing run. We'll see you in the morning. Oh, trash everywhere. Well, I said I'd see you in the morning. It's late afternoon, weird. Guy's got 52,912 projects in the air. So it's another, whatever today is, hot. That's what it is. Here's where we're at. I found a set of shorty headers hanging off another small block over there in storage. Those will barely work. I got to get a fuel pump push rod in, fuel pump plate, fuel pump itself, lightning hoses, double check the timing, wire an electrical water pump, get in the radiator, wire in those fans. All I got to go to the key switch back here, plumb the thing for fuel, find some fuel, and then we're going to fire this puppy off. Yes, again, it's a lot of work. But I want to break it in on this stand so we can make sure that it goes correctly before we plop it in the El Coquino over here. So let's dive right back in, start bolting some stuff on, figuring things out, plumb stuff. I cannot wait to hear this thing run. It is going to be loud and semi-violent. I'm ready for it. Doing some last minute checks here before we fire this thing. Oh, I got stuff everywhere. Had the TIG weld collar onto the lightning whirler. I snapped the set screw off. We got manifolds on this side and a shorty header on the other. It's going to be loud and obnoxious. That's what we got. I just need to run it long enough to seat the rings. I know it's got oil. We tested oil pressure. We primed it. That looks great. The bowls and the fuel make-a happeners are primed with gas and 2-stroke oil, a little bit of extra oil for the initial fire off. I've got fresh 93. Weird, I know. Gonna put my little jerry can here. We're at about 12, 13 degrees initial timing. May have to adjust that. I did set the idle screws up just a titch, because when this fires, I don't want it to get into blower surge and start romping around. I want it to hopefully jump into 1,500 to 2,000 RPM and just run. We want them rings to seat. I don't want to keep restarting it over and over and over and dumping more fuel in. Wash those fresh rings down. They need to bite and seat into the cylinder walls. So hopefully this will fire off and just run. I got the water pump rigged into a Milwaukee battery down here because I was too lazy to wire it in over there. The ignition is wired in with the switch that says fuel pump because the other one's broken. The cooling fans are constant hot. If I hang this ground off of this bolt, that'll fire up, but it's dead cold right now, obviously. So, can't help but be a little nervous. That's plugged in. A lot of measuring and work and time. All comes down to this. I don't know. Let's see what happens. Ignition on. Those are tight. Bring the thunder! Oh, startled me. Okay, well, that's a good sign. Well, fellers and fellettes, that's as good of a break-in as a guy can ask for. This thing lit right off. I mean, it startled me. I jumped out of my boots and right back in. I did not expect it to hit on the first crank there. The thing sounds great and it's running really good. I've done all the vittles on it and we're there. The biggest concern I had was blow-by on either side, which looks like smoke coming out of the valve covers essentially. And on a new build, that means your rings aren't seating and it's burning oil, and a lot of that compression is just coming through the block and out the breathers. We had none. The oil pressure is incredible, which means all of the bearing work and measurements we did, or I guess in some cases the lack thereof, look, it did work. Here you go. It's got 75 pounds of oil pressure. Everything is hunky-dory. It's hitting on all 8. We've got even heat all the way around this thing. It sounds incredible. I couldn't be happier. And we have no leaks thus far. I know the block's gonna be brown and black in probably a year or whatever, but for now it's fun to have a white engine in the El Coqueno. This was a little bit of work, but I'm glad I fired it here on the stand, can look things over. Now all I have to do is pull the lightning whirler cap and the blower and chiller off, sling this thing back in, plop that back on, and we know the thing's gonna fire right off once we get all the wiring and everything else done. Now, I hope that this gives you some confidence at home. You can do this. And look, you don't need all of this garbly gook on here. The reason I have this is I didn't buy it. Lucky and Alex did it. Hot Rod Garage. Thank you. Appreciate that. But the bottom end down here is what I'm talking about. There was no machine shop. There's no big bills here. We dingle ball honed the thing, put basic rings, basic bearings in, did all the measurements ourselves and all the machining ourselves. And look, it runs great. You can do this, whether it's your driveway, carport, living room, back deck, I don't know, but just try. There's a lot of forgiveness in these old pushrod engines. I hope you guys enjoyed this series. You're gonna have to wait though for this to get stuffed back into the El Coqueno, and that is coming soon. Thank you guys for watching. Appreciate you so much. Hey, if you're not subscribed, which half of you aren't right now, hit the button. It's free. There's zero obligation. You just get notifications when new videos come out. Thanks, guys. See you soon. Oh, that went pretty good. Pretty good.